Trying to drift Magnus doesn't work very well. I guess I should turn off the traction control. Alright, I'm jumping out. Have a good night, gentlemen.
Wait a minute.
vado per ragionamento.
He's gone straight on and take the first corner copies. That's yeah, that's where it was.
Do you know what the fastest man on track was last time round? 1:28.
Yeah. That don't surprise me. Honestly, I've been thinking about this, you know, and if we get a little bit of inclement weather, he's locked in the top 6, if we get a bit of kind of typical British end. Oh, look at that. That's a shot, sorry, Jack. He's been doing that all weekend, as John comes up.
I get up, and nothing gets me down. You got it tough. I've seen the toughest around, and I know, baby, just how you feel. You got to roll with the punches and get to what's real. Can't you see me standing here? I got my back against the wrecking machine. I ain't the worst that you've seen. Can't you see what I mean? Might as well jump. Might as well jump. Go ahead and jump. Go ahead and jump. Who said that? Baby, how you been? You say you don't know, you won't know until you begin. Can't you see me standing here? I got my back against the wrecking machine. I ain't the worst that you've seen. Can't you see what I mean? Might as well jump. Go ahead and jump. Might as well jump. Go ahead and jump.
Take the National Express when your life's in a mess. It'll make you smile. All human life is here.
Oh putain! Putain, il y a Ja pierdolę. Kurwa mać!
Det finns ett fint klipp på Raceroom Instagram. Kolla in det. Det var ståpäls verkligen. Otroligt bra version. Här är en ny... Roger, Laila och Raceroom. Vi är med dig varje vardagsmorgon i nöd och lust från klockan 05. Vi hade ju Uno Svenningsson här tidigare i morse. Aktuell i Så mycket bättre som har premiär nu i helgen. Han gjorde en fantastisk unplugged-version av...
the CEO of oil and gas giant ExxonMobil, a position he held for 10 years. During his time with Exxon, Tillerson was awarded the Order of Friendship by Vladimir Putin for negotiating an estimated $500 billion deal with Rosneft, a Putin-controlled oil company.
My relationship with Vladimir Putin, which dates back almost 15 years now, I've invested a lot of money, our company has invested a lot of money in Russia very successfully.
It allowed ExxonMobil to drill in an untapped Russian portion of the Arctic. The project came to a halt when the U.S. introduced a round of sanctions against Russia. Nevertheless, Exxon continued working with the chairman of Rosneft. This ultimately led to the Treasury fining ExxonMobil $2 million for violating them.
I have never lobbied against sanctions, personally. I continue to believe
the company you directed did.
To my knowledge, Exxon never directly lobbied against sanctions, not to my knowledge.
While CEO of Exxon, Tillerson used an email address under the alias of Wayne Tracker. He allegedly used the account to communicate with company board members about risk management issues relating to climate change. Tillerson used the account for 7 years, and Exxon reportedly lost a year's worth of those emails. Exxon also lost Tillerson when Trump tapped him for Secretary of State, despite the fact that Tillerson had no government experience, which is a first in modern history for that position.
You left a very good job for this, I want to tell you.
Tillerson came at the high recommendation of former Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and James Baker, as well as former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, all of whom have benefited financially from ExxonMobil contracts. But not everyone wrote a letter of recommendation. Tillerson's close ties with Putin raised eyebrows among many.
Based on all this information and what's publicly in the record about what's happened in Aleppo and the Russian military, you are still not prepared to say that Vladimir Putin and his military have violated the rules of war and have conducted war crimes in Aleppo.
Now, those are very, very serious charges to make, and I would want to have much more information before reaching a conclusion.
There is so much information out there about what's happened in Aleppo. You know, I find it discouraging, your inability to cite that, which I think is globally accepted.
Tillerson, unlike his boss, does believe that humans are affecting the climate through greenhouse gas emissions. However, Tillerson said that it's not clear, quote, to what extent and therefore what can you do about it. Since his nomination, Tillerson has been undercut by Trump around nearly every corner. While Trump promised Tillerson that he could staff up the State Department without White House interference, Trump interfered. When Tillerson attempted to act as a neutralizer between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Trump quickly sent out a tweet for his overt support of Saudi Arabia. Trump also went over Tillerson's head on the Paris Accord.
Do you personally believe that the overall national interests of the United States are better served by staying in the Paris Agreement? If so, why? And if not, why not?
I think we're better served by being at that table than leaving that table.
Tillerson's built-up frustration forced him to take some time off and gather his thoughts in his home state of Texas. After a few days, Tillerson reclaimed his position and popped back up in a rare appearance in a State Department briefing. A month later, Tillerson appeared on Fox News, where there was once again a noticeable gap between himself and the president.
I don't believe anyone doubts the American people's values or the commitment of the American government or the government's agencies to advancing those values and defending those values.
And the president's values?
The president speaks for himself, Chris.
Are you separating yourself from that, sir?
I've made my own comments as to our values as well in a speech I gave to the State Department this past week.
A recent report revealed that Tillerson allegedly called Trump a f***ing moron after a July 20th meeting with the president and had to be talked out of resigning. Tillerson denied the claim regarding his resignation, but would not address whether or not he called the president a moron.
Could you address the main headline of this story that you called the president a moron, and if not, where do you think these reports or
I'm not going to deal with petty stuff like that. It is intended to do nothing but divide people. And I'm just not going to be part of this effort to divide this administration.
The president has since challenged Tillerson to an IQ test face-off.
Did you undercut the Secretary of State today with the IQ comment? No, I didn't undercut anybody. I don't believe in undercutting people.
Although Tillerson is no stranger to scalding temperatures, the growing fire between himself and the president appears to be much hotter than that Texas heat.
I'm here for as long as the president feels I can be useful to achieving his objectives.
It's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
That's Rick Perry. Rick Perry is now in charge of the agency he wanted to end, the Department of Energy.
You can't name the third one? I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Perry was born in Paint Creek, Texas, to dryland cotton farmers. His father, a Democrat, took an 11-year-old Rick to the funeral of former U.S. Representative Sam Rayburn. This introduction to death would end up sparking Perry's interest in the world of politics. Perry attended Texas A&M University, where he was elected as one of A&M's Yell leaders, or for lack of a better term, a cheerleader. Perry well understood the basics of riling up a crowd, but he had a long way to go when it came to understanding collegiate agriculture courses. But he went on to graduate by the skin of his teeth in 1972, with a GPA of 2.5. Although his grades were low, Perry was soaring. He was ticketed with a slot in the Air Force, where he regularly flew disaster relief missions. Perry left the force in '77 with the rank of a captain and went on to work in the family business of cotton. During his time on the farm, Perry was quickly climbing his way up the ladder of Democratic politics. He was elected to the Texas House of Representatives, serving 3 two-year terms before switching on over to the other side and running for Agriculture Commissioner as a Republican.
Texans across the state know that Rick Perry is the man who's right for Agriculture Commissioner, because Rick Perry is a born leader and the only farmer-rancher on the ballot.
And he won.
We want them to come to Texas and make it Texas.
Perry served 2 terms as Agriculture Commissioner before filling the vacancy of Governor of Texas in 2000 when George W. Bush resigned from the position. He was elected 3 times to full gubernatorial terms, serving 14 years in office. And then he ran for president in 2012.
As president, I'll end Obama's war on religion, and I'll fight against liberal attacks on our religious heritage. Faith made America strong. It can make her strong again. I'm Rick Perry, and I approve this message.
Perry started off on a strong note, but he struggled in the debates and his poll numbers began to decline. But then Sheriff Joe Arpaio swung in and endorsed the governor at a crucial time when many thought Perry was too weak on immigration policy.
He speaks from the heart, so he's not one of these candidates that have it all down pat, what they're going to say.
But the endorsement didn't help. Perry suspended his campaign on January 19, 2012.
I have come to the conclusion that there is no viable path forward for me in this 2012 campaign.
But he wasn't done yet. When the 2016 campaign rolled around, Perry once again took a shot at the presidency. He only made it through 1 debate before calling it quits once again due to a poor debate performance and lack of funding. Following his campaign suspension, Perry endorsed Ted Cruz. But Cruz, like Perry, would eventually go on to suspend his campaign as well, leading Perry to endorse this guy.
I see Rick Perry the other day, and he's so, he's doing very poorly in the polls. He put glasses on so people will think he's smart. And it just doesn't work. People can see through the glasses.
Perry eventually took a break from politics and entered the world of dance. He appeared on ABC's hit reality competition show, Dancing with the Stars. But he lost that too. He was eliminated after just the 3rd week. But a few months later, he danced his way to a spot in the Trump administration. Perry had a difficult time at his confirmation hearing when Senator Franken and Senator Sanders pushed him on climate change.
How much climate change do you think is the science shows is due to human activity?
Senator, far from me to be sitting before you today and claiming to be a climate scientist. I will not do that.
I don't think you're ever going to be a climate scientist, but you're going to be head of the Department of Energy.
That's correct. And I know how to hire a really good scientist.
But he was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in a 62-37 vote. The former Dancing with the Stars contestant replaced nuclear scientist Dr. Ernest Moniz at a time when nuclear tensions are at the highest they've been since the Cold War. According to the New York Times, after Perry accepted his new role as Secretary of Energy, he had no idea what that entailed. Perry, who thought that the department was all about oil and gas, might have a lot of catching up to do.
Then President-elect Donald Trump looked across his desk and said, Perry, I want you to do for American energy what you did for Texas. And I said, I got it, Mr. President, I can do that.
Are there any ties between Mr. Trump, you, or your campaign, and Putin and his regime?
No, there are not. It's absurd, and there's no basis to it.
That's Paul Manafort. You may remember Manafort as Trump's second campaign manager, the one after Corey Lewandowski and before Kellyanne Conway. Manafort is currently a person of interest in the FBI's investigation into Russia's alleged meddling in the 2016 presidential election. But Manafort has reportedly been under FBI surveillance since 2014, and his ties to Russia date even further back than that. Manafort began his career in politics by helping wrangle delegates for Gerald Ford's showdown with Reagan in 1976. Manafort worked on several other campaigns, including Reagan's 1980 bid, George H.W. Bush's 1989 campaign, and Bob Dole's unsuccessful 1996 run. Lobbying was on the rise, and Manafort capitalized on it. In the midst of Reagan's candidacy, he co-founded Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, the half-lobbyist group, half-political consulting firm. Time magazine called the firm the ultimate supermarket of influence peddling.
You are as connected to the insider game of what you've even said on record yourself, influence peddling, as anybody. How can you be the antidote or anything to help Trump when you seem to go against his main message?
Depends on who you talk to.
The firm was notorious for signing multi-million-dollar deals with controversial dictators from all over the world in exchange for rehabbing their tarnished images in America. And that's where his ties to Russia began. Manafort most notably advised Ukrainian candidate Viktor Yanukovych through a series of presidential elections. At the time, Yanukovych was considered a controversial figure due to his close ties to Russia and endorsement by Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Sound familiar?
If our country got along with Russia, that would be a great thing.
Manafort spent nearly a decade as a consultant to Yanukovych's pro-Russian Party of Regions and as an advisor to Yanukovych himself. Manafort eventually guided Yanukovych to the presidency in 2010. But after prolonged protests, Yanukovych fled to Russia and was ousted from his post in 2014. It was around this time that the FBI reportedly began wiretapping Manafort. Manafort also has ties with Oleg Deripaska, a pro-Putin oligarch and Russian billionaire. Manafort signed an annual $10 million deal with Deripaska that committed him to work around the world and promote the interests of Vladimir Putin's Russian government. Fast forward to 2016. Trump was looking for someone to wrangle delegates in the lead-up to the Republican National Convention, so he tapped one of the best in the game, Paul Manafort.
Now there are people in the national security apparatus who are saying that they have questions about Donald Trump now getting classified briefings because of you, because of your close ties to Viktor Yanukovych and others. How do you respond to that?
Well, there are so many different parts of that we said are wrong. First of all, I don't see the classified briefings. Donald Trump sees the classified briefings.
You're not in the room when he receives them?
Not in the room when he receives them. He doesn't talk to me about them. So there's a total barrier there. Secondly, I have no foreign clients now. I have no clients. I have one client, Donald Trump.
With his new position secured, Manafort, along with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, met with Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya, reportedly to obtain damaging evidence on Hillary Clinton. Manafort was soon promoted to campaign chairman after Trump fired Corey Lewandowski from the position in June 2016.
You already knew the campaign, and there was not a lot of structure there, so you could come in.
Yeah, they'd gotten to a point where there were technical things that the campaign needed that weren't there, that Donald Trump wasn't focusing on because he was dealing with the American people.
While Trump was dealing with the American people, it appeared Manafort was dealing with Russian officials. Manafort reportedly sent an email to his long-lost billionaire buddy, Oleg Deripaska, offering private briefings on the campaign. Meanwhile, Trump seemed to be friendlier than ever with Russia. The Trump campaign worked behind the scenes to make sure that the GOP's new platform would not be able to provide Ukrainians with the weapons they need to combat Russian rebel forces.
Do you know what they did? They softened it, I heard, but I was not involved. They took away the part of the platform calling for provision of lethal weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. Why is that a good idea?
Look, I have my own ideas.
He's not going into Ukraine, okay? Just so you understand. He's not going to go into Ukraine.
By August 2016, the Associated Press reported that secret documents revealed handwritten, off-the-books data showing $12.7 million in funds made out to Manafort from the pro-Russian political Party of Regions. It was also reported that Manafort may have secretly routed $2.2 million to two different Washington lobbying firms in 2012, in the interest of the Party of Regions, which Manafort did not disclose. Embroiled in allegations, Manafort excused himself from the campaign, reportedly at Trump's request.
Well, I mean, I became a block to his ability to communicate his message. I didn't think it was fair. I mean, the allegations were not true. But the reality is I became a block, and my goal was to get Donald Trump elected president of the United States.
And now, it's 1 year later. It's been revealed that Manafort was being wiretapped under secret court orders before and after the election. Robert Mueller, the newly minted prosecutor in the Russian probe, ordered the FBI to raid Manafort's Virginia home. Mueller's team told Manafort to expect an indictment after confiscating binders filled with documents and computer files. Manafort has since reworked his legal team, trading in for attorneys who specialize in, quote, complicated financial crimes.
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
What are the prospects for encouraging job growth?
I think that there's a tremendous focus now on what can we do in California to create jobs and lower the unemployment rate. So I think that's really our biggest issue.
Okay, so what were the answers? What can we do? We're a lot of talking about it.
Let us demand that educators around America teach evolution not as fact, but as theory.
That's Mike Pence, the current Vice President of the United States, explaining evolution. But he wasn't always like that. Michael Richard Pence was born in 1959 to a family of Catholic Democrats in Indiana. Pence
Merry Christmas. Today I'd like to make a snowman with you. So, the first thing that we'll need is
himself was a Democrat for much of his youth. He idolized JFK and voted for Jimmy Carter over Ronald Reagan because why would you elect a movie star, he said. At Hanover College, Pence started hanging out with a different crowd. He was drawn to one of his older fraternity brothers, John Gable, when he noticed a gold shiny cross hanging from Gable's neck. But it was the power of music that truly changed Pence. As he explained in a 2010 interview, standing at a Christian music festival in Asbury, Kentucky in the spring of 1978, I gave my life to Jesus Christ, and that's changed everything.
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order.
After a brief law career, Pence ran for Congress in Indiana against Democratic incumbent Phil Sharp. It was revealed that Pence set up his campaign as a for-profit corporation, keeping some of the money for himself. He lost. 2 years later, he ran against Sharp again. Pence's campaign set up a phony environmental advocacy group to call voters and tell them Sharp was planning on turning the family farm into a nuclear waste dump. Pence's campaign was caught. He lost with 42% of the vote and swore off campaigning. For a career in radio.
This is Mike Pence.
The Mike Pence Show and other shows hosted by Pence aired locally for a decade.
Thanks to all of you listening.
As a media personality, Pence also embraced the written word, penning notable op-eds about how Mulan is bad and cigarettes are awesome. Despite the hysteria from the political class and the media, smoking doesn't kill, he said. It was around that time that Pence would get back into his political career. In 2000, he ran for Congress.
Our campaign this year has committed itself to talking about Mike Pence and what Mike Pence believes. I'm Mike Pence, and I ask for your support to serve Indiana in Congress.
His campaign website flaunted a promise to give money to institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior. A promise many read as a commitment to gay conversion therapy. Pence spokespeople denied that claim. Pence's promise didn't gain much steam, but he still used his seat in Congress to further his extreme beliefs. His efforts focus on limiting women's access to healthcare, blockading America's access to stem cell research, cutting Hurricane Katrina relief funds, and changing the definition of rape twice.
I want to urge my colleagues to stand with all of us, to stand for life, to stand for taxpayers. Let's end public funding of the largest abortion provider in America.
In 2012, he went on to run for governor of Indiana. During his campaign, he once again reportedly used campaign funds for personal needs. He also accepted more than $200,000 from the Koch brothers. He won. During his governorship, he implemented a law allowing discrimination against the LGBT community in the name of religion. The law most notably came to a head when a pizzeria used it as justification to not cater gay weddings.
Do you think it should be legal in the state of Indiana to discriminate against gays or lesbians?
George,
it's a yes or no question.
Come on, Hoosiers don't believe in discrimination. And this is about protecting the religious liberty of every Hoosier, of every faith, and we're going to continue to work our hearts out to clarify that to the people of Indiana and the people of this great country.
Yes or no, should it be legal to discriminate against gays and lesbians?
It's worth noting that Pence's own relationship is a little unconventional. A Rolling Stone reporter observed that Governor Pence referred to his wife, Karen, as mother. Pence also admits that he refuses to dine alone with women without his wife there, which thereby limits the power of women who work with him. But Pence's policies affected more than just gay wedding pizza. Some argue that he worsened the effects of an HIV outbreak. HIV rates were on the rise in a small rural county in Indiana, linked to the sharing of drug needles. Governor Pence was made aware of the problem by the Centers for Disease Control, but didn't act on it. Multiple people reported that he told them he had to wait and pray on it. Pence eventually allowed a needle exchange program, but only after infections had skyrocketed.
I do not support needle exchange as anti-drug policy, but this is a public health emergency. And on the recommendation of the Centers for Disease Control, I am authorizing a focused, short-term, limited needle exchange program if local officials deem that to be necessary and appropriate.
In the end, more than 200 people were infected. Months later, Pence would be tapped as Donald Trump's vice president. Pence stayed mostly uninvolved with the scandal surrounding the campaign, smiling and nodding through accusations of treason, sexual abuse, and corruption levied at Trump and team.
I think this is a good man who's been talking about the issues.
And that's all he has to do to remain one heartbeat away from the presidency.
People, and America is back.
It doesn't matter what the circumstances were that you were born in, as long as you have a normal brain.
That's Ben Carson, former neurosurgeon turned Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
Right now, our country is the patient.
The soft-spoken Carson had quite the temper growing up, and he detailed all of it in his 1990 book, Gifted Hands. His book stated that he once tried to hit his mother with a hammer over a clothing dispute. He punched a classmate in the face with a combination lock. He also tried stabbing a friend in the abdomen for changing the radio station.
And a knife blade struck with such force that it broke, and he fled in terror.
Carson had a lot of violent baggage.
My luggage. Hold on.
Okay. After these violent outbreaks, Carson started reading the Book of Proverbs, or Proverbs if you're going off of this mantle in his home.
Locked myself up in the bathroom and I started praying. I've never had another problem with temper since that day.
After leaving the bathroom, Carson graduated from Yale in 1973. In his book, Carson recounted a pivotal anecdote when he was deemed the most honest person in the class. The professor came toward me. With her was a photographer for the Yale Daily News who paused and snapped my picture, he said. That photo cannot be found. He also stated that he was offered a scholarship to West Point, although no record of this exists and the school doesn't offer scholarships. Carson did, however, get accepted into University of Michigan's medical school, where he struggled so much that a professor recommended that he drop out of medical school. He started studying for hours on end, and his grades drastically improved. He was accepted into Johns Hopkins' neurosurgery program. While at Johns Hopkins, he was appointed the lead neurosurgeon on a team of 70 that successfully separated conjoined twins. It was the first surgery of its kind, and the surgery brought Carson into the limelight. It led to publishing deals, a public speaking career, and even a cameo in the Farrelly Brothers comedy, Stuck on You.
We lost them.
Dr. Carson, good news. We found Bob and Walt. Someone took them upstairs.
Oh, fantastic.
Carson, as played by Cuba Gooding Jr. in the made-for-television movie Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story, was on the rise.
I always said you can do anything anyone else can do.
Only you can do it better.
In 2013, Carson hung up the stethoscope and became a contributor for Fox News. Naturally. Then, without any prior governmental experience, Carson decided to throw his hat in the ring for the 2016 presidential race.
I'm the only one to separate Siamese twins, the only one to take out half of a brain, although you would think if you go to Washington that someone had beat me to it.
And he was doing well, at first.
It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Polls will go up and down over the next year.
But as he grew in popularity, his violent past came up, and his poll numbers came down.
They say some of these stories would have been known to everybody in high school if they had happened the way that Carson says they did.
Do you think I'm a pathological liar like CNN does?
This $150,000 radio ad paid for by Carson and his campaign probably didn't help either.
If we want to get America back on track, we gotta vote Ben Carson. A matter of fact, go out and vote.
I'm Ben Carson, and I approve this message.
By March 2016, Carson dropped out of the race. Shortly thereafter, he endorsed Trump, the same man who had confused Carson with President Obama.
What Ted Cruz did to Obama, Carson.
After Trump's election win, Carson was immediately offered a role in the administration as Secretary of Health and Human Services, which he declined due to his admitted lack of experience. But just a short time later, Carson overcame his self-doubt and accepted the position of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. As Secretary, Carson will oversee federal public housing programs and come up with solutions to homelessness, which should be simple. According to Carson,
Poverty to a large extent is also a state of mind.
Our education delivery system in America is antiquated, and it is quite frankly embarrassing.
That's Betsy DeVos, our Secretary of Education. Born to a billionaire industrialist, the conservative Christian activist hails from the 88th richest family in America.
I'm not only a Republican, even worse, I'm a well-off Republican.
DeVos positioned herself in politics early on. She was elected as student senate at Calvin College, a Reformed church school. She volunteered for Gerald Ford's 1976 re-election campaign and attended the Republican National Convention in Kansas City. And shortly after, she met her husband, Dick DeVos, son of billionaire Richard DeVos, who was the co-founder of the multi-level marketing scheme Amway. Meanwhile, DeVos was working her way up the Republican ladder, first as county GOP chair, then as one of Michigan's delegates to the Republican National Convention. DeVos became a constant in conservative politics in Michigan, serving 4 terms as state GOP chair. She worked closely with the second Bush administration and raised more than $150,000 for the campaign. The DeVos family has donated more than $200 million to a number of right-wing and Christian causes. Her brother, Eric Prince, has his own ties to big money. He formed Blackwater, a military contracting service, whose employees opened fire on unarmed Iraqi civilians in 2007, killing 17 and injuring 20 in a crowded square in Baghdad. The company rebranded itself several times after the incident tainted their image. Oh, and he's quite the Trump supporter as well.
Doesn't get any easier than that.
Absolutely not.
During the 2016 campaign cycle, DeVos donated millions to several Republican presidential candidates. First, Jeb Bush and Carly Fiorina, and then Marco Rubio, but not Donald Trump, who she'd be working for just months later. It was clear she was laying the groundwork for something with her donations to conservative causes. In a 1997 op-ed, DeVos admitted, "I have decided to stop taking offense at the suggestion that we are buying influence. Now I simply concede the point. They are right. We expect a return on our investment." 20 years later, Senator Bernie Sanders put her on the spot about this exact concept.
Do you think if you were not a multi-billionaire, if your family has not made hundreds of millions of dollars of contributions to the Republican Party, that you would be sitting here today?
By the end of 2016, that investment finally paid off. Even though DeVos had previously said Trump was an interloper and did not represent the Republican Party, she jumped at the opportunity to work for him as Secretary of Education. Neither DeVos nor any of her 4 children attended public school, and it showed. During her Senate confirmation hearings, DeVos seemed to lack the fundamentals of basic education terminology.
Well, I was just asking to clarify then.
Well, this is a subject that has been debated in the education community for years. But it surprises me that you don't know this issue.
Despite numerous slip-ups, evasive answers, and a letter from some of her fellow college classmates that urged the Senate not to confirm her, DeVos locked the position in after Vice President Mike Pence cast an unprecedented tie-breaking vote.
The Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
President.
Even though she had donated more than $800,000 to the senators who were voting on her confirmation, she still almost lost. While her position in the cabinet marks her first full-time job in the education system, DeVos was a controversial figure in the education sector long before her nomination. She is a leading voice for school choice through student vouchers, which gives families public taxpayer dollars to send their kids to private and parochial schools, often which violate the constitutional principle of separation of church and state.
The reality is that when you give parents choices, they make good choices on behalf of their kids. In every other area of our society, choices work.
Ultimately, DeVos wants to shift public funding away from public schools. And as Secretary of Education, she's doing just that.
I don't support discrimination in any form.
Does your program ban such discrimination? Yes or no?
What program are you talking about?
Your charter school and your private school grant program.
As I said before, and let me say it again, schools that receive federal funds need to follow federal law, period.
I arrest everybody. We arrest murderers, rapists, I can go on and on. That's just another propaganda to get me to stop enforcing all the laws.
That's Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona. And here he is shaking hands with President Trump. Arpaio was found guilty of criminal contempt for disobeying a court order to stop traffic patrols that were racially profiling Latinos. He was set to be sentenced on October 5th and faces up to 6 months in jail if convicted. But instead, President Trump pardoned him. During his run for the White House, Trump visited Arpaio's hometown of Fountain Hills to convince the people of Arizona to go out and make sure he gets reelected.
Sheriff Joe, I want to thank you. You have some sheriff. There's no games with your sheriff, that's for sure.
Here are a few things that you should know about the self-proclaimed toughest sheriff in America. Arpaio, now 85, became sheriff in 1993. His reign lasted 24 years until he was voted out of office in November 2016. He's notorious for setting up the prison overflow site known as Tent City.
I already have a concentration camp. It's called Tent City.
The not-so-luxurious desert facility housed up to 1,700 inmates who were forced to wear pink underwear.
Grown men in stripes, wearing pink boxers, working on a chain, standing out in the public with everybody humiliating them.
Temperatures sometimes climbed to 120 degrees, and inside the tents, they could soar to 145. Heat like this melted the shoes right off the inmates.
I'm not ashamed to say it. They did something wrong, they're going to be punished.
The food was no better.
We eat pig slop every day, not even fit for animals.
He also implemented the first ever female chain gang there. Arpaio's practices have received criticism from an array of organizations. In 2008, the ACLU won a lawsuit against Arpaio. Quote, Arpaio routinely abused pretrial detainees at Maricopa County Jail by feeding them moldy bread, rotten fruit, and other contaminated food, housing them in cells so hot as to endanger their health, denying them care for serious medical and mental health needs, and keeping them packed as tightly as sardines in holding cells for days at a time during intake. The sheriff was ordered to follow the ruling, which required him to end overcrowding, improve medical and mental health care, and provide food that meets the U.S. Department of Agriculture's dietary standards. Maricopa County requested a lift on the ruling but was denied, with an ACLU attorney noting that the jails have a long way to go. They did. Arpaio's office has paid millions of dollars over the years in wrongful death settlements after denying inmates proper medical care.
Never will I let people out early on the excuse that there are too many people in our jails.
But Arpaio's inmates weren't the only ones who suffered. The whole county paid for it. Arpaio and his buddy, former Maricopa County Attorney Andrew Thomas, filed lawsuits against county officials, judges, and lawyers over the course of 2 years. They lost every case, and it cost Maricopa County taxpayers almost $45 million.
The more they complain, the higher my polls go.
Additionally, under Arpaio's tenure, more than 400 sex crimes were not fully investigated, and in some cases, not investigated at all. Even though most suspects were known in the 32 reported child molestation cases, Arpaio's office failed to follow through. After public scrutiny over the case, Arpaio came out from the shadows and said, "If there were any victims, I apologize to those victims." Arpaio's violations finally came to a head in 2017, when he was convicted of criminal contempt for knowingly violating a federal judge's 2011 court order to stop racially profiling Latinos. His conviction carried a possible maximum sentence of 6 months in jail, as well as a monetary fine. But Arpaio will not go to jail.
I am not a racist.
That's Jeff Sessions.
Torture is the way to go.
That's Stephen Miller.
I'm not only a Republican, even worse, I'm a well-off Republican.
Well, right now, our country is the patient.
Doesn't get any easier than that.
Absolutely not.
Torture is the way to go. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity.
That's Stephen Miller, President Trump's senior advisor for policy. At just 31 years old, he is the mastermind behind the Muslim ban and served as Trump's warm-up act en route to the White House. So who is he?
I don't know much about him, but I know that he's pretty right-wing.
Stephen Miller was raised by Democratic parents deep in liberal, multicultural California, and it didn't take long for him to reject it all. Stephen's middle school classmates say he's a motivated, serious guy, or at least that he wants to be taken seriously. But the execution isn't always exactly smooth. When he and other students were discussing how to fairly divide the last slice of a pizza, Miller reportedly decided to just slap his hand down on it, and no one wanted it after that. By 14, Miller was a cultural warrior with a love for Star Trek. A friend and fellow Trekkie said Miller called him to break off their friendship. "I can't be your friend anymore because you are Latino," he said. Miller continued his war against minorities throughout high school. He wrote columns attacking Hispanic students for not speaking English.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash? And we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us.
Miller went on to Duke University, where his regular column, Miller Time, gained infamy for its hardline conservative views. Miller gained the most attention when he made his first television appearance on Fox News and openly defended the Duke lacrosse case.
It was always for them about their political agenda, and their political agenda has been from day one to make a big issue out of racism and gender and class warfare.
After school, Miller looked for work on Capitol Hill. Following a stint with notorious Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, he joined the man who would take him all the way to Donald Trump, Senator Jeff Sessions. Miller joined the Trump campaign soon after, regularly appearing as Trump's warm-up act at campaign rallies and working crowds into a frenzy with red meat rhetoric.
Will you come out and vote for your country and your family and your children? Are you prepared to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?
But he didn't have a national profile until July 2016, when he helped pen Trump's nomination speech at the Republican National Convention. For 75 straight minutes, the longest convention speech in over 40 years, Trump painted Miller's portrait of America, a failed state cratering on the verge of dystopia, besieged by immigrants, rapists, cop killers, and terrorists, despite the economic and statistical evidence to the contrary. After the election, Miller continued to cultivate a key role in Trump's White House inner circle. Along with chief strategist Steve Bannon, Miller is widely cited as an architect of Trump's first executive order banning visitors from 7 Muslim-majority countries. When that travel ban was later rejected by the courts, Miller came out of the shadows to lead the public attack.
I'm prepared to go on any show, anywhere, anytime, and repeat it and say the President of the United States is correct 100%.
But that may be the last collaboration between the two Steves. As Trump distanced himself from Bannon, so did Miller. One White House advisor reported, "He made it clear he isn't a Bannon guy." Instead, Miller began aligning himself with Jared Kushner, working closely with Kushner's Office of Innovation. Miller, the man who once wrote an op-ed titled "Sorry Feminists," is also spearheading women's issues alongside Ivanka Trump, tackling topics such as family leave and childcare. He claimed that the gender pay gap is a myth and argued that women get paid less because men work longer hours and choose better paying jobs. Miller wrote, "The pay gap has virtually nothing to do with gender discrimination. Sorry, feminists. Hate to break this good news to you." A former Republican congressional aide recalls he and his colleagues feeling creeped out a little bit, watching Miller at Trump's campaign rallies. All the anger right underneath the surface just waiting to come through. Like, what's gonna happen when this guy gets the power? Now the world is starting to find out.
Are you ready?
Jared Kushner was born but a simple rich boy to Charles and Cyril Kushner. Charles was a New Jersey real estate developer and the son of immigrants. He was also one of the top Democratic Party donors in the country. Jared would follow suit, making the maximum allowed donation to Senator Frank Lautenberg when Jared was just 11 years old. That's a lot of lemonade money. Charles also donated to institutions of higher education, like a $2.5 million donation to Harvard University. Jared would be accepted there a short time later. What a coincidence. But Jared's acceptance may have cost more than just a large sum of money. Senator Ted Kennedy allegedly called Harvard's admissions staff to demand Kushner's acceptance. Kennedy had allegedly been asked to do this by Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey, who received $100,000 in campaign donations from Charles beyond Jared's donation. The book, The Price of Admission, How America's Ruling Class Buys Its Way into Elite Colleges, cites an official from Jared's high school who claims his test scores were not Ivy League standard. A former classmate wrote in The New Yorker, "On a campus full of t-shirts and cargo shorts, he wore dress shirts and jeans from the then trendy label 7 for All Mankind, and he drove a Range Rover around campus." He quotes another classmate, "He didn't do it with a sense of humor, he did it like, I'm fucking rich."
There's nothing too obnoxious that you can ask for right now.
While Kushner was at Harvard, his father would send him real estate documents from their company. Jared would end up buying apartments in nearby Somerville with $10 million of his father's money. When he graduated, he'd sell them for a handsome profit. Kushner went on to graduate school at NYU. He was admitted just months after his father rented office space to the university. An NYU official said of that agreement, "The university was the recipient of a wonderful gift as part of this transaction, and NYU is most grateful to Mr. Kushner." But Charles Kushner's biggest move to give his son Jared power would come by accident. Under a plea deal, Charles admitted to paying a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, videotaping it, and showing the tape to his sister. It came in the midst of an investigation into criminality of Charles's campaign contributions. His brother-in-law and sister were supposedly cooperating with investigators in that matter, and the prostitute tape was considered revenge.
These charges are entirely without merit. He will be completely exonerated.
In the end of it all, Charles Kushner pled guilty to tax evasion, witness tampering, and illegal campaign donations. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The U.S. attorney who put Kushner behind bars? Chris Christie. With his father in prison, Jared would watch over his empire. The Kushner Company sold $1.9 billion in real estate immediately before the housing collapse of 2008. Kushner would work on buying up distressed properties in Maryland and the Rust Belt to turn them into higher-ending housing. Kushner would say, "It was a lot of construction and a lot of evictions, but the communities now look great, and the outcome has been phenomenal." He moved the company towards some other big purchases, including the largest single-building purchase ever, 666 Fifth Avenue. He loved the real estate business, maybe too much. He told Portfolio magazine that real estate is like porn, for rich people. He'd also buy a newspaper, the New York Observer. "I found the paper unbearable to read. It was like homework." And then he said, "I own the New York Observer." But more on that later. Around that time, another infamous New York real estate developer would tell Howard Stern that his daughter Ivanka was dating a very rich guy. Not as rich as me, but a very rich guy from a real estate family.
Jared is a very successful real estate person, but I actually think he likes politics more than he likes real estate. I'm going to tell you.
When two of the biggest real estate socialites might be dating, the gossip world takes notice. Here are a few Gawker headlines from 2007 and 2008. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, just friends. Why did Ivanka and Jared break up? Do the Trumps and Kushners hate each other? Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner totally get to do it now. The empires wed, but not until Ivanka converted to Judaism. Donald Trump, father of the bride, used the wedding invitations to advertise his golf courses. Meanwhile, Jared's newspaper, the New York Observer, wasn't doing very well. Beloved editors were pushed out, and some alleged he was using it to take on personal vendettas, like when he supposedly demanded an editor do a takedown on a paper that covered his father's crimes. The Observer, formerly irreverent, intellectual, and liberal, began publishing staff editorials like, "Cut taxes, stop flight," "Excuse me, higher taxes won't work," and "Dear Occupy Wall Street, it's time to go home." In a period where his father-in-law, Donald Trump, was pushing racist conspiracy theories about the birthplace of President Barack Obama,
If he weren't lying, why wouldn't he just solve it?
the paper only published positive coverage of the real estate magnate. Very odd for a paper that notoriously ridiculed the New York elite. Kushner got close with Rupert Murdoch in a parasitic symbiotic relationship. Murdoch's New York Post killed a story linking Jared's father to a famous prostitution ring, and Kushner's Observer wrote glowing pieces on Murdoch. Kushner juggled media and real estate empires for a few years, and it wasn't going too great. He was hemorrhaging money on 666 Fifth Avenue. He allegedly harassed rent-stabilized tenants trying to force them to move. His newspaper was floundering, and some said his felon father was still secretly running the business. Kushner needed redemption. But then his father-in-law decided to run for president. Being a Republican became convenient, and Kushner's history of donating to Democratic candidates, including $6,000 to Hillary Clinton and $10,000 to Democrats as recently as 2014, would come to a close. Jared joined his father-in-law's campaign and would become an integral part of many top decisions.
And he's very good at politics.
Kushner would advise Trump on Israel, help him vet his running mates, and manage the team. The Observer endorsed Trump for the Republican nomination. Trump would allegedly bring Kushner in on phone calls and then not tell the other person Kushner was on the line. Kushner allegedly helped push out Corey Lewandowski. When Donald Trump tweeted a picture of Hillary Clinton next to a big pile of money and sheriff stars, Kushner defended Trump and denounced an Observer writer who criticized him.
You are fake news.
Kushner was a silent but powerful force throughout the election. And then Trump won. Kushner would be important to the transition team and named senior advisor to the Trump White House. And it's been working out for him. Remember that failing office building? Kushner negotiated a deal with a Chinese firm, allegedly linked to the Chinese government, to buy a large portion of it, while he was responsible for the Trump team's negotiations with China. All that from just a simple little rich kid.
This is the story of how one man rose from Goldman Sachs banker to climate change apocalypse experiment mastermind to World of Warcraft gold magnate to far right-wing propagandist to shadow president. Born in Virginia to patriotic blue-collar Democrats in 1953, Bannon's first political experience was running for student body president at Virginia Tech in 1975. The outgoing president, Gary Clisham, denounced him.
It has in the past been somewhat of a precedent for the incumbent president not to endorse a successor. In this presidential race, some candidates have resorted to such low tactic of misinforming and misrepresenting the student body. I must intervene.
Bannon went on to win the election. Bannon joined the Navy, telling a fellow officer it would look good on his resume because he wanted to go into politics someday. Little record of his time in the Navy exists because of undisclosed issues with the service's personnel archives, but he was stationed in the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, and at the Pentagon. He left the Navy for Harvard Business School. Then, like much of future President Trump's staff, Bannon went to work for Goldman Sachs.
I'm in business with Goldman Sachs. I do things with them. The firm is certainly not the firm it used to be, although it's still one of the building blocks of our capitalist society.
He was with the investment bank only briefly before splintering off his own firm, Bannon & Co., which focused on the media, where Bannon would amass his fortune and also his penchant for propaganda. Bannon executive-produced films like the Sean Penn-directed The Indian Runner. It cost $7 million to make, and made $191,125. That is bad.
Never trust a bear.
An executive who worked with Bannon said he was constantly telling stories about great warriors of the past, like Attila the Hun. Victory at all costs is a dangerous way to look at the world. As part of his payment for brokering a deal between two companies, Bannon got partial ownership of 5 TV shows. One was Seinfeld. A portion of the profits of Seinfeld and its syndication go to Steve Bannon.
And who is responsible for making hate-mongering and fascism popular again? You are.
Bannon was also director of Biosphere 2, which is not a movie. It was an experiment where humans lived for years inside a giant terrarium in the desert. It did later make it to film as a Pauly Shore movie.
It's been referred to in the past as a planet in a bottle.
Bannon wanted to research the consequences of massive climate change on Earth, as if it were an inevitability. He orchestrated a huge change in the path of the experiment, which caused chaos among the scientists. He was pushed out of the project, but then, against scientists' wishes, was brought back as CEO. He brought federal marshals with him to enforce a court order, turning the whole place over to him. His takeover failed, and Bannon resigned, but not before threatening to ram a scientist's safety report down her redacted throat. He did not shove anything down that scientist's throat, but in 1996, he was arrested for domestic violence. Bannon denies these allegations, and they were withdrawn.
Mr. Bannon grabbed his ex-wife's neck, also pulling her into the car. She started to fight back, striking at his face so he would let go of her. She was able to get away from him. She ran into the house with him following her. She was dialing 911 when she got to the twins. Mr. Bannon jumped over her and the twins to grab the phone from her. Once he got the phone, he threw it across the room.
The couple separated a year later. Bannon moved into the spare room of his first ex-wife. Bannon sold his investment firm and made enough money to produce Titus, an adaptation of Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. It was a critical success, but a total commercial failure. Yet still, around this time, Bannon realized the power of the media.
It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day.
It's 2004. Steve Bannon puts out his first documentary.
In the traditional motion picture story, the villains are usually defeated. The ending is a happy one. I can make no such promise for the picture you're about to watch.
In the Face of Evil, Reagan's war in word and deed did not see wide release, but Bannon had his eyes on Hollywood. He had discovered the power of the media in controlling people, and he was learning in turn to control it. He met with powerful Christians in Hollywood and Washington to discuss a propaganda strategy. He worked on an unreleased film called The Singularity, Resistance is Futile. It tells the story of a world ravaged by scientific hubris going against the will of God. It calls abortion the American eugenics movement. He wanted it to star Mel Gibson. It was never made.
I'm ashamed of that.
Neither was Bannon's rap musical adaptation of Shakespeare's Coriolanus, Word. Another unproduced classic, Destroying the Great Satan, The Rise of Islamic Fascism in America. It opens on a shot of an Islamic flag flying over the White House. The apocalyptic theme runs throughout Bannon's canon. Bannon would later reveal that he believes we are heading toward the end of the world.
They have a Twitter account up today, ISIS does, about turning the United States into a river of blood.
But for every unproduced film, there are a few produced ones that made it to the straight-to-DVD circuit, all denouncing the evils of liberalism, non-Christianity, the establishment, and Bannon's former employer, big banks. They have interviews with luminaries like Newt Gingrich and Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. One blames Woodstock attendees for the 2008 financial industry bailout. One, entitled Undefeated, is the story of former Alaska governor and defeated vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin.
You can't blink, so I didn't blink then even.
He premiered one film, Generation Zero, at a Tea Party convention, where he was booed by the audience for his ties to Wall Street.
Unlike the manufactured crises of global warming and healthcare, this is a true crisis.
And then there's the fantasy gold business. Bannon worked with a company that used Chinese labor to earn gold in World of Warcraft. He paid laborers to play the game, then sold that virtual gold for real money. He convinced former employer Goldman Sachs to invest $60 million in the venture. They were eventually sued for ruining World of Warcraft. But Bannon would prevail. In 2010, Bannon let a friend move his company into some office space he owned. That friend was Andrew Breitbart.
I'm looking for you, you Occupy freaks with your glitter bombs. Bring it on!
Founder of Breitbart.com, a far-right news outlet that includes sections such as Black Crime. When Andrew Breitbart died suddenly in 2012, Bannon would take over his site. Under Bannon, the site grew further right-wing and supported Ted Cruz. That may have been because some of Cruz's biggest backers, Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca, invested millions into the site, but something happened.
He's a very successful entrepreneur.
The Mercers will come back later. In 2014, a New York real estate magnate and WWE Hall of Famer would hire an analyst to put together a documentary on how different outlets treated that magnate.
I am the least racist person you've ever met.
Breitbart has one note: high priority, major supporter of Mr. Trump. In an interview, Bannon would say,
what we need to do is bitch slap the Republican Party and get those guys, heaving too. And if we have to, we'll take it over.
And the Republican Party felt the same way about Bannon. In 2013, instead of attending CPAC, a major conference for mainstream conservatives, Bannon hosted an event nearby for the uninvited.
I'm embarrassed by your awesomeness.
The event featured speakers banned from the main event, like Pamela Geller, who major human rights organizations have denounced for her Islamophobic comments.
Islamophobic, and we hate them, and it's so ugly, and we hate you, but we know you're going to sue us, so we'll let you run the ad.
Bannon would do an interview in 2014 where he outlined what he thinks is a coming war between Christianity and Islam.
All you have to do is read the news every day. See what's coming up on Twitter, see what they're putting on Facebook, see what's on CNN, see what's on BBC, see what's happening. And you will see that we're in a war of, I think, immense proportion.
He gave heavy praise to far-right European parties like Brexit's UKIP and France's National Front. He was clearly interested in the use of nationalism, xenophobia, and populism to gain power.
They don't like me either, so it doesn't really matter, does it?
At some point, he flirted with the idea of working with Ted Cruz or Ben Carson to help them win the presidency. But Bannon would meet Trump for a second time through Rebecca Mercer, the billionaire backer of Breitbart News and former backer of Ted Cruz, who'd switched allegiances to New York real estate developer and Teen Choice Award nominee Donald Trump.
It's huge.
Fun fact, Rebecca and her father Robert are huge Republican fundraisers who also own a large stockpile of human urine being used for research to help extend human lifespan. At one point, Trump advisors were trying to tame Trump's fiery rhetoric. For Mercer, that would not stand. It was time to populate Trump's team with voices as hateful and apocalyptic as his. The Mercers suggested Bannon. Just days later, Bannon and Trump were golfing together at one of the Pizza Hut spokesman's many golf courses.
What do people think?
Let them talk.
A few days after that, Bannon was running Trump's campaign. Other campaign leaders were pushed out, Paul Manafort, an expert political analyst for dictators, and Corey Lewandowski, an expert in assaulting female journalists, didn't make it to the election, but Bannon did. He resigned as CEO of Breitbart to focus on the Trump campaign. He referred to Trump as an imperfect vessel for his own revolution. But he must have been doing something right.
If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken.
Donald Trump won the election to be the 45th president of the United States. Bannon would catapult his job of running the campaign into a high-powered office in Trump's administration, chief strategist, a role that requires no Senate confirmation and has the ear of the president. 169 congressmen signed a letter asking President Trump not to appoint Bannon. It is one of the most powerful roles in the world. And Bannon made it even more powerful. The president put out an executive order putting Bannon on the National Security Council, a hugely powerful arm of the government. The same order bumped the Director of National Intelligence and Joint Chiefs of Staff from the council. But the president never wrote that order. He never even read it. It was written by Steve Bannon. It required no approval by the legislative branch or the judicial branch. No other member of the cabinet had to be involved. All Bannon needed was Trump's signature to give himself an immense amount of power. And he got it.
I am not a racist. I am not insensitive to blacks. I have supported civil rights activity in my state.
That's Jeff Sessions, the 84th Attorney General of the United States. Born in Selma, Alabama, child of the segregated South, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III is named after two notable Confederates, Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War, and Civil War General Pierre Beauregard. Sessions' career in politics began in 1975 as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama. By 1981, he had worked his way up to the U.S. Attorney for the district and held that position for 12 years. Sessions gained notoriety for his relationship with race in a 1985 voter fraud case, which he prosecuted and lost. The case involved 3 black civil rights leaders in Alabama. The 3 defendants were acquitted of all charges due to lack of evidence brought forward by Sessions. Civil rights groups cited the case as evidence of Sessions' racial discord.
The impetus of it, I think, was to keep blacks from voting, to intimidate people.
In 1986, Ronald Reagan nominated Sessions for federal judge. Former colleagues testified that Sessions had used the N-word and joked about how he thought the Ku Klux Klan were, quote, okay, until he found out they smoked pot.
This assertion is ludicrous.
Sessions was denied confirmation by a Republican-controlled Senate committee over his alleged racist remarks.
Mr. Sessions is a throwback to a shameful era. It's inconceivable to me that a person of this attitude is qualified to be a U.S. attorney, let alone a United States federal judge.
But Sessions' checkered past didn't seem to stop him from moving up the ranks. Sessions was elected Attorney General of Alabama in 1994. As Attorney General, Sessions defended the state's education funding model, which gave twice as much money per student in prosperous white neighborhoods as it did to students in poor, largely minority communities. 2 years later, Sessions won the election for U.S. Senator for the state of Alabama. Here are some other fun facts about Sessions. He was deemed amnesty's worst enemy since opposing almost every immigration bill that has included a path to citizenship for immigrants who entered the country illegally. His outlook on marijuana also hasn't changed much since his infamous Klan comment.
Lady Gaga said she's addicted to it and is not harmless.
Sessions continued to climb his way up the Republican mountain and won a 4th term for U.S. Senate in 2014. And by 2016, he finally reached the peak.
Make America great again!
Sessions became the first senator to endorse Trump and was a major policy advisor in regard to immigration and national security. Trump announced that he would nominate Sessions to be Attorney General, and despite opposition, he was confirmed as Attorney General by a vote of 52 to 47. During the election, there was talk that Sessions had met with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak on the campaign trail. Sessions had denied any communication with the Russians during his confirmation hearing.
And I not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Following his confirmation, a Washington Post report revealed that Sessions had indeed met with Kislyak twice. Sessions penned a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee insisting that he was, quote, correct to say that he didn't have communications with the Russians because the question, quote, did not ask about them. But just a day after the report came out, Sessions recused himself from overseeing the FBI's investigation into Russia's alleged election meddling.
I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign.
He also denied that he recused himself from the Russia investigation because of that report. Sessions has also denied a reported third meeting with the Russians.
I do not have any recollection.
He has since lawyered up.
I don't recall it. I'm not sure. I don't recall it. I don't know. I don't recall. It's conceivable that occurred. I just don't remember it.
I am not a racist. I am not insensitive to blacks. I have supported civil rights activity in my state.
That's Jeff Sessions, the 84th Attorney General of the United States. Born in Selma, Alabama, child of the segregated South, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III is named after two notable Confederates,